Friends, lovers, social network graph nodes. Before the internet, there were letters. Written on paper, I know it's weird, but it did happen. And this letter, written by John Locke, is part of a vast network that evolved out of interesting people like John Locke writing letters. The Republic of Letters is a blanket term for a group of correspondences between a wide variety of intellectuals, scientists, philosophers, and thinkers. The term is usually deployed to refer to a period from the 16th to 19th century, but as we will see, depending on your angle of approach, this can be somewhat limiting. Because I am a completely normal person with normal hobbies, I spent a fun evening making this for you. It kind of maps, kind of. This is a very, very partial network graph showing the correspondence between people with whom John Locke shared letters. I apologize for the colors. After getting Java to work to make this, I only had so much energy left. I got this data set from the Republic of Letters project at Stanford, from whom I also stole the title of this talk because it was the objectively correct title. If you're interested in the topic, I highly recommend looking at their work. Here's a nicer image so your eyes stop bleeding. And with an actual map, to show this against an actual map. This isn't just Locke, this is all the correspondence that a researcher decided fell under the rubric of a Republic of Letters. As we will see, the term becomes a little vague. For example, the first recorded use of the term we have extant is from 1417, when the Italian humanist Francisco Barbero wrote a colleague praising him for his many discoveries of ancient Roman texts. Barbero praises his colleague for, quote, bringing to this Republic of Letters the largest number of aids and equipments. Here we see already the participants' fascination with the ancient world. As a side note, nothing will show you the degradation of quality of our current networks, like doing image searches for odd Salon talks. Turns out Barbero is also Italian for barber. Anyway, back to the real Barbero. After that, the term remains absent from the extant historical record for most of the 15th century. However, we do have a lot of examples in this time from the Italian humanists idealizing this sort of non-geographical society. They use phrases like sodalitas literaria, or fellowship of letters, and orbis eruditus, aka the erudite world, which would also be an excellent metal band name. I had a better font on this, and I apologize, but this is metal enough. Okay, so you can see that even in the absence of the term itself, there is still a sense of the world distinct from the worldly. It appears again in 1494 when Erasmus complains about the ignorance of intellectual culture in a work called the Anti-Barbari, which is linguistically linked to barbarian, no relationship to the barbers earlier. Here he's probably using the term Republic of Letters in the sense of learning, but he and his contemporaries were definitely aware of the double meaning of epistles. In 1517, Martin Luther went trick-or-treating and kicked off a whole thing you might have heard about. If you can't read the image, it's 95 Reese's. I do not apologize. In response, dialogue between the learned in this time starts explicitly asking questions about faith and theological issues. There are increasing references to res publica literaria, explicitly or implicitly, in opposition to res publica Christiana. There's a sidebar here I don't have time to go into about an anonymous document, probably from this period, called the Three Impostors, the impostors in question being Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad. When it came to questioning, they went hard. But because of how hard they went, we start to see here one of the underlying principles which was essential to the Republic of Letters. There's a somewhat surprising amount of people crossing religious and political lines in service to the pursuit of knowledge. Of course, people got upset and there were heated words and shitposts. But overall, there's a sense that most people involved here cared more about the truth than belief. Time and again, we see examples of writers ignoring or dismissing with gestures of friendship differences between them in order to get their nerd on. There's a lot of, I am in sorrow that our two countries are in conflict, blah, 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 but dude, have you seen these flowers? There emerges here a theme of the idea of Europe as a distinct entity. Now, of course, from a modern perspective, Europe is somewhat problematic, what with all the colonialism and smugness. But when the supposed Holy Roman Empire looks like this, it's not hard to, but the name of this file is scarymap.jpg. It's not hard to imagine that some of the smartest people in the world would try to create a place of ideas that dispense with silly things like borders and nation states and religious affiliation. The Republic of Letters increasingly takes on the aspect of a place outside of physical space, beholden only to lofty ideals. I should note, I'm talking about events like Luther and the Renaissance as navigational aids, but it's important to note that when researching this, the timeline feels fragmented and somewhat arbitrary. I read one source which was ostensibly laying out a timeline that jumped from 1517 to 1453 to the Renaissance in order to make a point about the topics being engaged, and all the scholarship is like this. There's a very strong sense of atemporality about the whole enterprise, almost as though it could still be continuing today. Foreshadowing. In the 16th century, they turned to the interplay between Greek, Roman, and Christian antiquity. It slowly architecture, thank you. It slowly began to dawn on them that the ancients had not been omniscient, and they spent a lot of ink contending with that notion. The network began to extend to Africa, the East Indies, and this hip new joint called the New World, a bunch of people were really into. It won't catch on. The Italian Renaissance, of course, really kicked it up with their focus on antiquity. Old ideas were being pulled out and examined again by all kinds of people, and again, they communicated these ideas by networks of letter writing. Humanists trained their students in letter writing, modeling their letters on Pliny and Cicero as opposed to the apostolic letters of the Bible or formal correspondence. Letter writing became increasingly acknowledged as a formal art, and manuals on letter writing got churned out at speed. Erasmus, again, published a work including 150 alternate variants on how to open with, "Your letter pleased me very much." I mean, he looks like the kind of smug bastard that would write that, right? It's funny, but it feeds back into the idea that the members of the Republic were all civil men, regardless of political or religious affiliation. And I did mean civil men. Of course, times being what they were, women were largely excluded from the world of learned communication by letters. There are fleetingly few examples of some female naturalists or scientists, but women doing thinking was very much not a done thing at this time. But of course, as you might have noticed, women nonetheless do thinking. Despite being kept out of official channels, many women at the time were still able to engage with the learned world by creating gathering places where people with powerful ideas could meet and debate them. Often there is evidence in the marginalia and between the lines that some of these women significantly influenced the shape of European thought in a powers behind the thrones sort of way. There is almost certainly an entire other talk on this movement, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention it. They called these gatherings salons. Some of them were rather odd. It's almost as if a group of brilliant women conspiring to bring together a gathering of intellectuals could have some resonance today. I love that look. That side eye was perfect for that line. It's also worth mentioning that people who made up the Republic of Letters were otherwise wildly varied. If I may bother you with the eye-bleeding graph again, if by chance you can read any of that, you'll probably recognize Robert Boyle, but who the heck is Onsham Churchill? Well, it turns out he's probably worth a talk on his own, but I'd never heard of him before I wrote this. The Republic was a republic because it allowed anyone in. It had a built-in filtering system. Sure, you could write a letter to René Descartes, but he'd only answer you and, more importantly, pass your ideas along to others if you weren't an obvious crank. And speaking of cranks, yes, for those of you who had Steen mentions Athanasius Kircher on your bingo cards, my boy was in there too, writing about his cat pianos and his bad hieroglyphs and his giants in Sicily. That's 2 Kirkers in one night. Yes. It went on like this for some time, the Republic adapting to the interests of the times. In the 17th century, natural science took the lead with people like Francis Bacon and René Descartes. In the 18th, interest turned to philosophy with Leibniz and Voltaire. Through the wars, through the revolutions, through the other wars, through rise and fall of country and pope, they just kept writing letters to one another, creating a network of ideas unbeholden to any ideal but the pursuit of knowledge. The general opinion among scholars is that the Republic of Letters per se disintegrated in the last decades of the 18th century, but it's a loose term and a bold idea. T.S. Eliot set up a network of correspondence that he explicitly modeled after the Old Republic. Author and pacifist Romain Rolland in 1919 attempted to do something similar, which he referred to delightfully in a letter as the Internationale of the Mind. And in the modern day, with the turning away from collapsing social media empires, I have on more than one occasion seen the phrase, the Republic of Newsletters. You cannot kill a dream. The Republic of Letters is truly colossal in every sense. It stretches in space across the entirety of Europe and beyond. It stretches in time from at least 1417 to arguably today. And it stretched in thought from philosophy to politics to dinosaur bones, or not dinosaur bones, sorry, to tiny flowers to the idea of what makes a Republic of Letters. For my ending toast of the evening, I'm going to put up the T.S. Eliot quote here, read it at your leisure, but my toast itself is to some of you, those of you in the audience tonight who have bold ideas and weird ideas and ways to make the world better, who are going to go home and write a letter. And welcome to the Republic.